It seems hard to believe that I met Cindy, I think it was 11 years ago. She was on the street corner of downtown Fort Worth, and she was passing out flyers. And in the flyer, it told her story, and it just asked for a simple donation of a blanket. And I called her the next day, and I said, I'm so impressed with your son's initiative to empty his piggy bank and donate a blanket to the homeless, and I would love to be involved. I would love to do what I can and donate a blanket as well. And that has been a friendship for her and I ever since then. And since it was a blanket that started our friendship, I'm going to tell you a quick story about a blanket in my house. And I promise I won't get off track, and I hope that you can understand why I told this story today, because I think it applies to every single one of us here. 17 years ago, I decided that I was going to learn how to sew, and my very first project was going to be a king-size quilt. And I don't recommend that being your very first quilt to me, because not only did I have to learn how just the basics of sewing, threading a sewing machine, but I also had to learn how to cut the fabric, measure it, sew all the little strips together, and then after I sewed the strips together, I had to sew it all to make a big pattern. And then you have to get it quilted. You have to get and that's kind of expensive. And then they give it back to you, and I had to hand sew around this king-size quilt, hand stitch it. So needless to say, this took me, my little side project took me 3 years to complete. Well, after I completed the quilt, I put it on the ground, I took a picture, and then I folded it up and I put it in the cabinet on a top shelf so nobody could touch it, because I had worked so hard and I was so afraid that my kids would get a hold of it, and I didn't want it to get dirty. And I know that the purpose of a blanket is to keep others warm, for comfort, for security, but I didn't want to risk it getting dirty. Well, you know, I think that kind of applies to a lot of people. There are some people in this room that they don't want to get in the messiness of life. They don't want to get involved in things that might hurt them or stain them. And so they stay on the top shelf, and you don't get out there because you're afraid of getting hurt or stained. And so you're not doing what you were created to do, and you miss out on a lot of blessings. And then there are a lot of people that have been hurt by life. They've been damaged and stained. And they stay on the top shelf as well, but for a different reason. They believe that they are damaged goods and that they bring nothing to the table, and there's nothing that they can do they have nothing to offer. And that is not true. So they hide in the cabinet, in the security of the cabinet, and they don't get out there. Well, the third group, they've got it figured out. We realize that we're stained and damaged, and some things, life has happened, but instead of staying on the top shelf, they're on the bottom shelf, and I just completely forgot to tell you something about my quilt story. Oh my gosh, I totally screwed this up. I'm so focused. Okay, I'm so sorry. Can you hit rewind again?
I didn't get in trouble yet, so I'm actually liking the way the story's going.
Okay. Stained and damaged. You're going to understand this when I tell you the whole reason for this in a second. So I did that with my quilt. I'm going to go back a little bit. With my quilt, I folded it up and I put it in the cabinet so no one can touch it. Well, this is the most important part of the story. Jason, one day, I came home and I looked at my quilt was on the ground. It was on the ground of the laundry room. And I thought, oh, what's my quilt doing on the ground? And I looked and I picked it up, and it wasn't dirty. It was covered in grease. My whole entire quilt that I worked so hard for was covered in grease. And I thought, I went through the 5 stages of grief. The first one was denial, like, this is not happening, this is not happening. And then it was anger, like, what in the world? Well, it turns out Jason unknowingly grabbed my quilt from the cabinet to move some work supplies. And he used that to move some equipment, and it got covered in grease, and then he threw it on the laundry room floor so I could wash it. So that, oh my gosh. And I know that, I can't really remember how bad I was crying. I do know that my youngest daughter says that she still remembers this day like yesterday from the screaming and the crying and the things coming out of that laundry room. And so when I got to the final stage of this grief process, which is acceptance, I put the quilt into the washing machine and I washed it and I dried it and I took it and I folded it up. But this time I didn't put it on the top shelf, I put it on the bottom shelf. Because what more can be done to it? What more can be done? So if anyone wants to use it, go ahead. Well, over the years, that became the favorite blanket in our house. My kids always used it for slumber parties because it was so big. And so when we had company over, we just take the quilt. I found that I always used that blanket, not even realizing, but it was the favorite in our house. Well, when I was trying to figure out what I was going to speak about this year, and this is where I got ahead of myself earlier. I took my blanket, and because it was used again, and I was folding it up, and I realized that over 98% of those stains that used to be there, they weren't there. And I realized it's because every time it was put into service, it was washed. And every time it was washed, the stains started breaking down. The quilt was getting softer, which is why everybody liked to use that blanket, because it was so soft to all the use. And as I was folding it, then I realized that's us. And then you've already heard the three types. The ones that's, don't be like the quilt that I put on the top shelf, which you're so afraid of getting hurt that you stay there. Don't be the ones on the top shelf that you don't get out there because you're afraid of getting damaged or hurt. But be the one on the bottom shelf that because of your hurts and your stains, you've got compassion for others. You know what they're going through. And as you start to bless others, you find that the blessing comes back on you, and all of the wounds in your past, they start to get healed. And the more you give, that's God's economy. That's how He works. Every time you think you're out giving Him, He's giving it back to you. And I think Cindy and Phillip are just perfect examples of this group. They don't let their hurts and stains keep them from being servants to others. And in doing so, they understand the words of Jesus when He said, "It is far better to give than receive." And like I said, that's God's economy. And I find it apropos that the new movie that's going to be made is going to be called 5,000 Blankets. Did you know there's a story in the Bible of a little boy who gave of his lunch? He gave all that he had and he handed it to Jesus. And Jesus took it and fed 5,000 people. Who would have thought that when Phillip emptied his piggy bank to be the first person to donate a blanket, that it would give birth to a non-profit ministry, a business, a Hollywood movie, all of the mayors, everybody here. You just can't, but that's how God works. He takes what you have and He multiplies it exceedingly abundantly beyond all we can ask or imagine. And I read recently a quote that said, "Divine intervention often awaits human initiative." When Phillip and Cindy took the initiative to do something, they opened the door for God to intervene on their behalf. And look at all He's done and will continue to do. The story is still being written. It's going to be far beyond what we can imagine. So in conclusion, and thank you so much for being patient with me. That's why when you go to tell a story, don't take these. You got me all off. I got worried. But I hope my quilt story made sense. And in conclusion, I want everyone here to know that, like my quilt, you too were created for a reason. You have a purpose. And each one of you has a gift that the world needs. And nobody else can give it but you. There's a lost and hurting world that needs what you have to offer, and you need them. I promise that if you take the initiative, give what you can, serve where you can, do what you can, that you'll never be, and stay accessible by living on the bottom shelf. If you will do that, stay accessible, that you will never be disappointed in God's divine outcome, His divine results. And you will understand that faith in Him really is a fantastic adventure in trusting Him. So thank you.
I think that was a perfect story. How about you?